Thank you. It's great to have an opportunity to participate in what should be a really exciting day. I guess before it becomes glaringly obvious, I should say I'm certainly not a statistician, I'm certainly not a geneticist, and I'm certainly not an IT professional, so I'm here to talk about data, which might not make a whole lot of sense. My interest in data is really as an avid collector and in the use of it in the research sphere, but also particularly commercially. And we started looking at data, and this big data is a term that's around, and it sure as is big. It seems to me to be two types. So we have a heap of tools coming along. Could be, NIR, hyperspectral cameras, flavour chemistry. All these things have huge amounts of data. We test one bit of meat and we get 2 CD discs full of data, and it's 2,000 points. They're all to do with makeup of different chemicals and molecules in a bit of meat. The question is which ones matter. So you got the data all right. It used to be pretty simple. You had something like growth rate and in a feedlot, and you just looked at that, or ADG, and there it was. You could work out what was going on. We've now got so much data, we'll always get a correlation, but you never get the same one twice. So what you think worked wonderfully today, here it is, the whole answer tomorrow, of course, is totally wrong. So this big data stuff with a lot of the systems we've got, CT, DEXA, whole genome sequencing, FLIR cameras, is huge data, but just trying to interpret it. What do you actually mean? How do you apply it? Becomes the issue. On the other side, of course, we had things like eating quality and genetic applications, and most of my expertise has been in the eating quality, where you just always need more. So you're trying to get big data rather than try to reduce it down to its essence. You're saying we need more, and we need it to be more intensive, because a lot of things come with it. So in terms of MSA, this is what we've got in consumers at the minute. It's a lot of data. It's a lot of people. It's about 150,000 consumers globally. A lot of linked studies there, and every one of these consumers has eaten 7 pieces of beef. So every one of those pieces we know something about. What was the cut? What was the breed? What was the age? What was the pH? How was it hung? How did we cook it? All the rest of it. And we can build a pretty good global consumer map, and that's useful. About 2/3 of this data is straight MSA data, MSA projects directly or collaboratively, and about the other third of it is really people internationally that have used MSA protocols. I know they've used common standards to generate data on their own. So there's a lot of data around. And as you start getting the data and get involved in these projects across countries, of course this whole, G by E thing becomes massive, and you start to realise there's no such thing as just Australia. We've got different bits. The two things we know for absolute certain is that, genetics and environment interact. There's no question about that. We also know that, genomics can work, because we've got data on the old SNPs, the really basic sort of genetic stuff we've been at that says yes. If we look at the marker for calprestatin, we can certainly help predict toughness. If we look at the markers for marbling, we can certainly help marbling. That's a small part of it, really. We know, the bits of the picture are there. So we know ultimately genomics and genetics do have a big impact on eating quality. How it hooks together, we're a long way off knowing. The other thing we know for sure, of course, is that absolute potential of any animal is set the day we fertilise an egg. It'll never get better. Everything we do from that point right forward to the plate can only make meat worse. So the whole issue, if we have a perfect system and absolutely everything is being done right, 100% of the answer is genetics. If we have an imperfect system and we abuse the cattle and we muck around and this starts before birth and we have bad droughts and we don't do the right thing, well, probably environment's much bigger. But so, how important, how much is in the feed and how much is in the genetics? Well, it's 100% in the genetics minus what you mucked up is really the message. And when we get into these things, we find a lot of this data is complementary. We have, okay, what's grass-fed cattle? We'll go look at some cattle in Ireland or Poland or somewhere, and maybe New Zealand, and maybe northern Tasmania, and the idea of grass there is a bit different to South Africa and a bit different to northern Australia, a bit different to the New England right at the minute. So, what sort of grass? How does it interact? What happens with cattle? We have different breeds in different countries, obviously. And we have, again, back in Europe, you have people that have grass-fed cattle, but then in winter, of course, they're in a shed. and they fed, but they're not fed like we'd feed them in an Australian feedlot. They're not fed like we'd feed them in a US feedlot. You know, if you're in Japan or Korea, it's the same but different. So all these interactions to try to work out how much of this is genetic, what is the impact on eating quality, how does all this environmental stuff hook together. You know, the European herd use a huge amount of dairy base. We use very little. You know, some countries have a lot of bulls. We have almost none. So to try to get all this, it's really important we actually accumulate data and look at it, collect it under some sort of common framework and utilise it so we get absolute global answers that we can rely on. The people that have been involved in a lot of this data collection, particularly in Europe, but across the globe, where we've been doing collaborative work, we sort of twigged to this a fair while back. No one's got the money or the resources, or in fact the cattle available to really get the whole picture. So it becomes really important to try to merge and handle data, you know, in a common way. So we've actually got this far that we've actually agreed to a concept we've called a Databank, and it's about really making sure we use common protocols. So, you know, setting up a structure that's efficient, you know, a very large data storage structure and interlinked databases so that data is common. Now, everyone owns their own data, everyone totally controls their own data, but in the event that it makes sense to share it or use it or pool it, it's easy to do. And we've been working with Andrew and our international collaborators to get this set up, and we now have a foundation under the UN that is set up to do just this sort of thing, so we can do something with data. I guess when we talk about phenotypic data, and I guess what have we got? MSA's got a lot of data. We've got over 100,000 cuts sitting in a database, all connected to consumers, connected to some of these international databases, and it all has an eating quality score. 10 people ate every sample, so there's a million odd samples that have been eaten. But what we don't have, a lot of this has been deliberately built off commercial cattle, so we don't know the sire and dam. First thing we might have known is we had some commercial cattle we killed in Tasmania or somewhere. We know they come from King Island, that's about it. We know how they ate. So we don't have, it's probably light on this real detailed phenotype. Very, very good in terms of eating quality and unique in the world. And a lot of the linkages from the animal, from when we slaughtered the animal on, very, very strong. You know, what was a carcass, what was a cut, all that sort of thing. We look at what's around the globe in big data sets. The old Clay Center, Nebraska, USDA Meat Animal Research Center, stands out. I mean, there we have a centre that from 1964 on has been doing nothing really but crossbreed cattle. Back cross, forward cross, purebred, you know, composite. They have a herd of about 7,000 cows running on 30,000 acres of grass. They've got their own feedlot. They have a research abattoir. Every one of those animals is recorded from birth. Every one of them goes through to a carcass. They don't have any eating quality data. But it's a huge resource, 46 different breeds, you know, particularly strong on 18 of the major US breeds and very, very strong on composites. So you have these 16 breed composites and so on that they're testing. So that's the sort of data we need to link to. You know, if we can add eating quality data to that sort of base, suddenly we again get a much bigger picture. And of course ICBF, the Irish Cattle Breeders Federation, something of an inspirational model I want to spend a little bit of time on. But all bovine animals in Ireland are on one database, dairy and beef. And it would have, I guess if there was any place I thought they probably wouldn't be able to get their act together, it would have been Ireland. You know, get down to the pub and have a good argument, but actually make a decision and agree is a hell of an effort. So there's some people there like Andrew Crome who really do need a pat on the back. But they started off with multiple AI companies, something like 18 or 20 breed societies, a number of, all the milk recording companies, the government, and they managed to put it all together into one system. So they've got one database and all data on all cattle is in there. So it's milk recording records, it's every animal that's slaughtered, their slaughter records, everyone, every movement record, every time a vet went to a farm, every time a straw semen was used by AI, it's all on one database. And then they're driving really hard to do it. So they now have something like 30 million animals, over 100 million records that sit in that database, growing daily. It's the largest computer in Ireland, and people like Google and so on are headquartered in Cork Island. Down the road 20 miles, this bloody farmer co-op that's got bigger computers, needs bigger computers to hold the data. And they're making absolutely massive gains day by day as they're talking about genomic registration of every calf born in Ireland. They have a test centre at Tully where they test about 500 cattle a year. They're not registered sires, they're not stud things they think of the head. They go out to their database and say what semen was used in Ireland this year. They say this bull had high use, we need to have 20 progeny to test and we want them from this herd, this herd, this herd, this herd. So into Tully comes some cattle I bought. You know, this particular bull was used over a Holstein cow. This other one is a five-way cross out of some commercial backyard herd. Those cattle come together, they're fed, they get individual feed conversion, they kill, they get individual cut weights. So a massive amount of commercial data, and of course it's tied to some EU incentives. So if you want to get your last little, you can get some extra money if you keep good data. But to do that, to actually access that money, you've got to use what they call a 4 or 5 star bull. So we have a rating on every bull in Ireland. It doesn't matter whether he's purebred, crossbred, composite, whatever he is. And if you want to get your bit of money, you've got to use the top 2. So imagine what that does to actually drive progress. So to me, this is an absolute model. I mean, I first come across it and started to understand it and really got into what it really did. I've got to say, I said to the fellow at the time, I wasn't sure whether to slash my wrist or get excited. But anyway, I'm still here, so I got excited. And I guess the reason I'm passionate about this is that I've seen it work. I mean, I know genetics work, and I know we can harness it, but I also know our system has been very badly flawed in terms of being able to do just that. So where do we stand? Really, we've got this trickle-down genetic model, and it was world leading probably 20 years ago or 30 years ago. I used to lose track of time at my age. But it really relies on, we have very good stud breeders, and we do, registered cattle people that breed bulls, and then we sell them at a sale and they go off in a commercial herd, and effectively they're lost. So, most of these bulls are sold, let's say 15 months, but somewhere around that. So we know how that bull grew, we know a bit about his brothers and sisters and his aunts and uncles. We know absolutely nothing ever, though, about his progeny. And yet, what's more important? What would you rather know? Three close relatives, or 3,000 if he's an AI sire, or would you rather know about his actual progeny? When you get in and start doing ET flushing and measure progeny, you find they're not all the same. So which one was best? How many bulls do we miss? Because this absolute pearler that was out in some commercial herd, no one ever knew about. So that's been our model. We have this total disconnect, and I guess the thing that aggravated me a bit more when we were doing the white paper on beef language was that there's about 3 million records, over 3 million records a year go into MSA. Now that's got marbling, it's got carcass weight, it's got fat depth, it's got ossification, massive amount of data we can use for eating quality. Less than 500 of those 3 million records make it back into breed plan. So how much do we miss? So that's sort of been my core frustration. And I guess over time, as I say, I've seen some of this work. Just from a personal experience, we fed a lot of cattle at Charlton and beef, and then we decided we'd get into dairy because there was an opportunity. And for 10 years we've been feeding beef cattle. You'd pick up the old green book, National Research Council, nutritional guidelines, and you'd design a ration for beef cattle, feed it, and sure enough, if you fed 12 kilos of this ration to a 300 kilo steer, he'd grow at 1.2, just worked on average across the feedlot, worked really well. So start doing your dairy budget, you pick up the red book, National Research Council Dairy Cattle Guidelines. I'm going to feed 40 kilos, I'm going to get 50 litres of milk and whatever, and what do I get? 15 litres of milk and fat cows, really fat cows, So I cut the feed back, and of course I get less milk and slightly less fat cows. And we went out and we actually bought 21 high-producing cows out of a clearance sale, and we just threw them out in the pens, and sure enough, 7,000 litres and well-conditioned cows. So we knew we had a genetic problem, but being dairy, we had a herd test, we had all the detail, your size, you can do it. So we ended up bringing in importing some Holstein genetics out of the US, originally through Cocos Island as cows and later through semen. In the space of very little time, you can double production. We actually saw it and did it. We had 1,000 cows and milk, 450 of them, the bottom half just become recips. And we don't want your calves, we just want you to carry one. And we got 20 cows at the top end, and 3 years later, a couple of generations later, you've got a 7,000 litre herd. So it can happen, so I guess having seen that do it, we've been chasing it on beef. Going back to Charlton Feedlot, we started feeding cattle in 1971, and every individual animal was recorded. Pretty simple stuff, weight in, weight out, where it come from, and all the rest of it. Tail tag number, and we used to collect these things by poking a knitting needle through a steel box to pick up all the cattle that were in this pen. It was way before computers, and later on computerised. But we took that data to Sandy McClintock, who was a geneticist down at Bacchus Marsh at the time, and just had a look at our groups. We knew we had differences in cattle. You buy 200 head of Angus cattle and put them in a pen, and there's a top and a tail, and we thought it's probably 20 or 30 bucks. When we looked at it, the top 25% of those cattle were $200 a head better, not 20, 200, and the bottom half were 200 worse. And yet, more or less, they look like a pen of cattle. So we knew, early on there was big differences in commercial cattle. It didn't immediately jump out and bite you. A bit later on, Judy and I had a farm and a shop down in Albert Park, and as part of that, we had been driving MSA R&D for a long time and believed in it, so the shop was totally based on eating quality, no cut names. Every cut in there was sold, and it was a 5-star, 4-star, 3-star, priced accordingly. And because it was a little boning room, every animal we had to cut up, so we weighed the cuts and identified them. So we weighed the fat, weighed the bone, and so we knew that the rump off this one weighed X and it was a 4-star and whatever. So we could value that. We had a shop that was based on it, and we took that value back to Farmgate, sort of a very early example of BBM. Those couple of graphs on the bottom of the page, the left one shows the composition of the carcass, the white's bone, the yellow's fat. The one on the right shows where the dollars were. So we were paying Farmgate about 40% of retail. And again, we're killing little groups of 15 or 20 pet cattle. One load you think are beautiful, look the same. Andy Dolgellan here picked a lot of them, and then when you cut them up and you look at what weight did you actually get and how did it eat and what's that worth at retail, and work your 40% back, never less than 50 cents a kilo dead weight. Variation in these tiny little groups, and often $1. So, $1 on a 300 kilo carcass is 300 bucks, and it's huge money. We think about premiums and discounts in 25 cents or 25 bucks. It's not that, it's hundreds. So critical that we get underneath it. Okay, about there. And I guess just to drive that forward, we're supplying the shop off our own herd and some other herds, like-minded people. And so we've got about 500 breeding cows. Obviously, they range from heifers through to 8 to 10-year-olds. We've got a rotational three-way crossbreeding, so we've all had 25% Angus shorthorn and then a composite. The composite's varied. They're all single-side joined. We had birth weight, we had an individual ID. We had 3 calving seasons for the shop, so it's autumn, winter, spring. They've all got all that DNA data, some of which we sold to Pfizer. They all had carcass data and at a retail value. So you'd think that much information, it'd be pretty simple to work out which one you should cull, but how do I adjust for all this breed difference? How do I adjust for season? How do I adjust for age? And effectively, we couldn't use that data, a huge amount of it. But because our system is driven on this trickle-down model of data, you actually can't get near it. So immensely frustrating. If we could use the dairy thing, we knew what we had, we'd go straight in and say, okay, you're a donor, you're a recipient, you're going to get your head cut off, and very quickly have a much better herd. We'd have this $1 a kilogram harness, but we can't do it with the current system. So that's probably the real message. I think the opportunity is the minute we've got this sort of trickle-down model, was once valid. Now we've been trying to defend it, in my view, for over 20 years, and we should have just got on with the job and grasped the opportunity. There is now no excuse. It can be done. We know it can be done. It's being done elsewhere in the world. So either we get up to speed and get ahead of the game and get with the leaders or become the leader globally, or we just drop behind. But if we can go from trickle down to outcome up, where we utilise every bit of commercial data that's out there, use all the carcass data, drive it to value the size and the dams, and then end up with decent prediction, we've got huge opportunity. So, I think the NLGC outcome should be a revolution and should be really exciting. I guess just to close, over 20 years, I've never been slow to criticise some of the things that MLA have done or some of the people and what they've said or done. So it's only right I should also congratulate Richard Norton and MLA on having the courage and the foresight really to set up this NLGC consortium. It's a marvellous step forward and they really should be congratulated. Thank you.
Searching for needles of meaning in digital haystacks. That's interesting. Not about which data, but which data matters. So our last speaker and our third cut on this conversation before we then get you to do some debriefing. Please make Andrew Cook very welcome.